We start with juicy toaster. It's not something I tell people on a daily basis, but when I was little, I'm going to say 7 or 8, I woke up to a banging on the window. At first I figured it was just the wind and tried to shrug it off to go back to sleep. But I kept hearing footsteps in my room. My room had a large enough area for you to walk in circles in front of my bed. You know, the kind of noises that are just supposed to be the house settling in. It sounded like someone was circling my room. I used to sleep with the radio on, and at this very moment it was playing a very depressing song that I can't remember the name of, but if I hear it on the radio, I get the creeps still. So that really started to scare me. The room also felt as if it was getting colder. At this point I was really scared. I decided to make a run for it to my parents' room down the hall. As I passed through the area where the foots were, I got so incredibly cold that I could see my breath and I froze for a sec only to hear the words, "I'm lost." I bolted to my parents' room, hid under their bed and cried myself to sleep. User, absolutely no shame. When I was about 13 years old, our dog ran away from home. This happened a few times, as the gate in the back was left open due to family members being careless and not ensuring it closed all the way, and she got out. Usually not a big deal. The neighborhood we were in was a pretty okay neighborhood, and I could usually find her not that far away sniffing at things, usually in the alleys behind houses, as that's where people set out their trash, etc., etc. She was just curious, and the minute she'd see me, she'd drop whatever she was after and come straight to me. We'd head home. No biggie. This one time it happened, though. I went looking for her and couldn't find her. I started to get a bad feeling and kept looking, probably a good 6 blocks away. Further than she'd ever roamed before was an area with a bunch of townhomes rental properties. She'd never gone that far before, and I was nearly in tears, ready to give up and go home to wait for her to hopefully find her way back this time instead. As I'd been out probably for almost an hour trying to find her at this point, walking around, when I saw some slight movement behind a wooden fence and thought I heard a yip. In this random person's backyard was my dog. She was muddy and wet, and they'd chained her to a post in the yard. She was pulling at the chain, barking and trying to get to me. It was pretty far away, so I assumed that the people had decided to take her in, having seen her running around or something. I knew it was her because she was my dog, damn it. And I knew it was her, and also she had her collar on. I'll never forget what happened next. I rang the doorbell. An older dude, Asian, opened the door after I rang the bell a second time, having given it a good 20 seconds and hearing people inside yelling, talking. Yes, he said, looking at me through a crack in his door. Hi, my name is Absolutely No Shame, and I'm here about my dog. I'm so happy you found her, and thank you for getting her off the streets. He looked at me suspiciously. What dog? He said, staring at me. What, my dog? The little white dog you have in your backyard, I replied. I was starting to get really creeped out at this point. We have no dog here, he said, and tried to close the door on me. That fucker. I stopped the door with my foot. The dog in your backyard, right there. I was getting louder at this point as I was starting to panic a little. I pointed towards his backyard and my dog started to bark frantically. He looked in the direction I was pointing, looked back at me, sort of made a disappointed or annoyed grimace and said, "Oh, that dog," rather unconvincingly. Then he left the doorway. I was totally mystified and more than a little frightened at this point. So I went back around to the yard and was ready to climb over the fence and just take my dog back myself when he came to the patio door of his yard, stepped into the yard with her. She cowered far, far away from him, I noticed, and unchained her from the post, then stepped over and opened his gate. She booked it to me and pretty much leapt into my arms as I kneeled down to meet her, and the old dude just wordlessly walked back inside with a scowl on his face. I have no idea what would have happened if I hadn't wandered out that far to find her, but he didn't seem to have any intention of returning her or calling the pound or anything. Her collar had a license tag information on it, as well as her owner's information on another tag, so his family could have dealt with it, but it didn't seem like they had any intention of doing so. I got the worst feeling from that guy. After that, if she ever got out of the yard again, she was never more than about 50 feet from the house/fence boundaries. We even found her waiting patiently outside the gate to the backyard once. TLDR, this guy had either rescued or stolen my dog, tried to deny it, was super shady, and I'll never know why. Edit, accidentally a word. Edit 2, apparently I used a derogatory term. Apologies, user banker goes raw. Experience. My grandfather's company does timber mining, was setting up an office in a relatively remote part of a third world county. and found a house that was dirt cheap, even for third world country standards. Obviously, there was a catch. The villagers in that area told him not to purchase it since the house was haunted and everyone who had ever lived there died violently. He decided it was just some superstitious BS and got it anyway. So the guy setting up the office will live on the top floor of the house with this family, and the lower floors for the office. He moved in with his wife and 3 kids. Anyway, my grandfather suddenly got no news from him for the longest time. Since this was in a remote part of a third world country, he wasn't too worried since he just assumed they lost power or something. He finally contacted the local police to go check on the guy since he was completely unreachable. They found everyone dead. Apparently the guy killed his wife, kids, and then himself with a machete. Yes, not a gun. A fucking machete. He actually hacked himself to death. It wasn't one of those cuts on the wrists to let everyone slowly bleed to death. Everyone was hacked down, including the guy himself. The description of the scene had to be an exaggeration, since I'm assuming the sight of 5 decapitated bodies, including 3 kids, was scary enough to make people see things, so I won't bother putting it here since I'm not sure what's true and there were details that people could not have witnessed. Let's just say I stopped paying attention after I heard the phrase magic machete. I was told the entire room was covered in blood, including the ceiling. Some people were saying the blood on the ceiling had to have gotten there because the spirits threw the bodies around. I had to explain about blood pressure and got tons of weird looks. Now the weird part, if this isn't weird enough, was that he managed to barricade the door with the bed with his wife and kids on it. And it's one of those gigantic old beds that's extremely hard to move. The locals say this is evidence he was possessed by spirits. I say moving to the middle of nowhere in some third world country drove the guy nuts, and crazy people can do all sorts of crazy shit and even perform crazy feats of strength. Anyway, my grandfather had to pay a few bribes to make sure nothing gets to the press, not hard, middle of nowhere, about the entire thing, and get the police to classify the deaths as natural. No idea how they'll explain that. Third world countries are awesome. All employees in the know had to sign an NDA too. He then tried getting other volunteers to set up the office, even if they haven't heard all the gory details because of my grandfather's gag order. Everyone knew the previous guy died. No one volunteered. He promoted one guy, gave him a fancy title and told him he's in charge of setting up that office. The guy quit,